This week on Quadriga, Iran deal, all about business. The Iran nuclear deal is just a few days old, and German economics minister Sigmar Gabriel is already in Teheran discussing business prospects with the regime. The declared aim of the nuclear talks was to prevent Iran from getting the bomb and to make the Middle East safer. But did the West have an ulterior motive? Is the deal with Iran all about business? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, John Barrick.
Welcome to Quadriga. A deal has been struck and already approved by the UN and Europe. Our new old trading partner, Iran, a country notorious for supporting terrorist groups such as Hezbollah and Hamas, for trampling on the rights of its own citizens, and for vowing repeatedly to wipe Israel off the map. Coming out of this deal, the big winners appear to be international banks and big corporations. So is this deal all about business? My guests today, first of all, Adnan Tabatabai, an Iranian political scientist based in Berlin. He says diplomacy works. This nuclear agreement is a blueprint for conflict resolution in the Middle East. And Alan Posener, British-born journalist who writes for the German newspaper Die Welt. He says the mullahs are the problem, not the bomb. They exploited our weakness to get a deal that benefits them without giving us anything in return. And Ursula Weidenfeld, well-known German economics writer and journalist, she says, Iran is not a friend. Iran remains dangerous. But it's better to try a deal than to risk a war. Alan Posener, let me put the first question to you. 12 years of negotiations, and then this. Germany has played a significant role in brokering this deal, we're told. You don't think much of the deal, do you?
Well, no, because basically we've since 2006 we've had UN Security Council resolutions saying Iran must irrevocably give up all its nuclear ambitions, including especially everything to do with preparing and enriching uranium. And they haven't done that. It's been mothballed, but even not all of the program has been mothballed. A third of the things they use, these, I'm losing the word now, are still in place.
Centrifuges.
Centrifuges, yeah. Thank you so much. And they haven't made any concessions on any other issues which you talked about.
Human rights and the attitude towards Israel, you mean?
Human rights, attitude towards Israel, attitude to all their neighbours. In fact, the expansionist nature of the regime. So basically, we haven't got anything politically in return. But obviously, also, as you pointed out, the Germans are eager to do deals with them. Not only the Germans, but especially the Germans.
Well, as we saw, the German economics minister and vice-chancellor was there before the ink had dried on the paper.
In fact, the ink hasn't even been signed yet because it hasn't been ratified by the Iranians yet.
It hasn't been ratified yet,
And it hasn't been ratified by the United States Congress either. So they're already there. And, of course, the reason is oil.
Well, Ursula Weidenfeld, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, told the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, this agreement does not make war more distant, it brings war closer. He's presumably thinking of the fact that, in his view at least, Israel feels isolated and abandoned, and that therefore a military strike against Iran is once again on the table.
Well, I don't think that he's right, because what we have is not a new thing of agreement of friendship or of whatever. It is only about preventing war from the Near East, and it is and it is probably the first agreement which came to a good end. It's not an end yet, but which has some perspectives of often good end in between Iran and the US. And I think that this is one of the most important things, given the experiences we made the last years in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, which were all conflicts which didn't come to to an end at all. So I think that this is perhaps one of the first steps to come to agreements which do not end inevitably in a war between the US, the NATO, Europe and one of the countries in this area.
But the German foreign minister, Franz-Walter Steinmeier, says himself this agreement is not based on trust. He says fairly openly, we don't trust Iran.
No,
we're going to monitor it very closely. But we've been doing this for years.
But it can't be trust between Iran and any of the countries the agreement is about. So it has to be control. And probably you are right when you say, well, the control thing is not as evolved and developed as it should be. But it is not trust, it is not friendship, it is mistrust, and it is... they are not friends. They won't become friends in the next 10 or 20 years.
So you think the monitoring now is going to be different from the monitoring before?
Yes, I think, because there is an agreement, there is the first step to be on speaking terms again, and that is quite historical in terms of, if you just only look at the relationships between the US and Iran before.
Adnan Tabatabai, Iran is a burgeoning economy, isn't it? I mean, it's the third largest economy in the region. When I look at the Iranian press, they don't talk about any of these foreign policy issues that I mentioned at the beginning of the programme. I get the impression that the Iranians don't see this as being any kind of backing down on foreign policy issues or on human rights issues, even perhaps on their nuclear program. They see it very much in business terms, don't they?
Well, I think economic aspirations may have been the main incentive to be at the table. For both
sides or just for Iran?
Well, I mean, we're now speaking about Iran. Obviously, economic interests are always the best accelerator to any process. But for the Iranian case, they know very well that as long as they do not improve the economic situation inside the country, this country will also lose its stability in every regard. So that's obviously a main incentive. So getting sanctions relief or the release of frozen assets to boost the economy at home is obviously a main goal. And therefore, this was one aspect that was the most important for the Iranian team. And when it comes to, you mentioned the issue of trust, for Iran it was about, okay, we make our nuclear program more transparent, and therefore we ask for sanctions relief, because you will then see that we have nothing to hide. And then obviously the extent of transparency on the one hand and the extent of sanctions relief on the other hand is something that you have to bargain. And verification mechanisms on both sides must compensate the utter lack of trust that exists on the table.
President Obama is already basking in the anticipated glory of a major foreign policy achievement. And the international banks and large corporations, particularly here in Europe, are hardly able to conceal their delight at this deal. Here are some of the arguments of the people who believe that this was an historic breakthrough.
The nuclear deal is the right move because Iran has now finally made a commitment to only use the technology for purely civilian purposes and agreed to international monitoring of its atomic program. That makes both the region and the world a safer place. The nuclear deal is the right move because cultural traditions have shaped Iran for thousands of years. It has many well-educated young people, and it's not wise to cut the country off from the world community long-term. Cultural exchange will make change there more likely. The nuclear deal is the right move because the West needs Iran as an ally in the battle against Islamic State. IS continues to pose the biggest challenge to peace and stability in the region.
Adnan Tabatabai, we talk about oil with Iran. Obviously, that's terribly important. We talk about trade. I'd like to concentrate on something else. These $100 billion or so that are sitting around frozen in accounts. What's going to happen to the money?
As I mentioned earlier, Iran really has to boost its own economy. And I know where you're coming from, because the question is always, will this money go directly into weapons for militias, etc., etc.? But the one thing that is really important here is that those elements inside the political establishment of Iran who have the finances to fund such groups have their very own institutions that are completely independent from state revenues. They have foundations and other institutions that are very well funded, and they don't need additional money. The money that is really necessary at the moment is to increase the capacities of Iran's industry, to have a job market which is responsive.
Build up the infrastructure. That's what Iran itself says the money will be mainly used for.
There is a lot of potential, for example, for tourism, and a lot has to be put into that.
Building tankers, for example. They're going to need a lot of tankers, aren't they, when they increase their oil supply? The fleet is pretty old now.
Exactly. I mean, anything starting from the centrifuges that are from the 70s to the tankers and the trucks that you would see on the roads, it's really 30, 40-year-old cars and tankers, etc. So that's where you have to put the money.
That sounds very good for German business, doesn't it?
It does. And what the amazing thing is, look, if you're having such a problem with your infrastructure, why build an atomic program like this? You're sitting on the third biggest oil reserves in the world, the biggest natural gas reserves. You don't need atomic energy, but they put all their money into that at the risk of their own of getting sanctions and of their own population suffering under them. The population has suffered under them. The regime is weakened due to that. And now we're handing the money on the plate without demanding that they really take down their atomic capacity. And
how can you say they're not taking it down? 95% reduction of plutonium, only 1/3 of centrifuges left operating.
What do they need that for? What do they need plutonium for if not to build bombs? No one needs plutonium except for anything else but building bombs. It's enough to have one bomb detonate in Tel Aviv, and you'll have changed the history of the Near East forever. So this is the whole point. They only need one bomb, and they've still got that capacity. And quite frankly, you know, this race to give them money, to strike deals, is
well, not only to give them money, to earn money.
Well,
it's the third largest economy in the Middle East.
Yes,
isn't it? And they're going to be buying, for example, German ships, German trains, cars.
It is not all about business. Firstly, it is all about peace and not to have another war in the region.
That's true.
Secondly, it is about business from both sides. So I think we have to put the things in the right order. It is not all about business.
But how can you say it's about not having another war in the region when we have a war in Syria, we have a war in Yemen, we have Hezbollah operating...
Would you recommend a war between Iran and Israel, or between Iran and the... this is ridiculous.
Ursula Weidenfeld, you say yourself you don't trust the Iranian government, but you have some faith, presumably, in the new monitoring system. The term that's being bandied about at the moment is snapback sanctions, isn't it? That if they don't fulfill the conditions, the sanctions are going to snap back. But if, for example, European businesses start investing billions into Iran together, you know, it could well amount to billions. Surely there's going to be enormous pressure on governments from big corporations and banks who are financing the new trade not to impose those sanctions, reintroduce those sanctions.
Well, I think it is becoming more difficult, of course, but I think that especially in the US, especially in Germany and in Europe, there's one thing which would stop everything, and that is the security of Israel. So I think that you are right, the temptations are there and there is moral hazard all around. But is it better to risk a war? Iran is officially involved.
With Israel, you mean?
Not only with Israel, in the area between
There are wars in the area, as Alan points out.
Officially, Iran is not involved right now, isn't it?
Unofficially, though, it's probably
yes,
cooperating with America.
Who is not
against,
involved?
Exactly, with Islamic State. This is a point. This is a point. Do you think, Alan, that perhaps Mr. Obama's enthusiasm for the lifting of sanctions and better relationship with Iran is the fact that he can't put boots on the ground against IS, but that Iran would be prepared to do that?
Well, that may be one factor, but you have to understand where is IS coming from. IS is based in Syria and Iraq, and these are two countries which are both allied with Iran and where the Sunni majority population has been alienated by a Shia minority government, which has basically ousted them from any stake in the country, which is why they are flocking towards IS as the only organization which stands up for them. So, in a way, Iran is responsible for that too. Now to come and say, oh, they're our savior, by fighting against IS is paranoid, quite frankly, or schizophrenic.
But I mean,
both.
Thinking about how I will come back to any question that you had for me. But,
carry on, please.
I mean, speaking of IS and basically, or ISIS, and thinking that Iran is basically the starting point, or Iran's involvement in those countries, how can we not speak about the events of the military invasion of the United States and Britain in Iraq? How can we not speak about the utterly poor management of the situation in the country after this invasion? I mean, there are lots of actors, as I mentioned earlier, who created this mess, and we would need all these actors to come together and basically clean it up. And therefore, you will have to talk even to those whom you do not personally like.
And that's probably what the US is doing. At least we hear that they're doing that now behind the scenes. Perhaps they'll be able to do it in future officially. Adnan, I want to ask you about something else, though. You mentioned this yourself, or implied it. We talk about problems in the Iranian economy, but in fact, there's a young, prosperous, well-educated generation that's emerging in Iran. Does this deal bring the hope of regime change coming from that corner, or at least reform?
I mean, the important thing is that, like in any other country, these people hope that their government gradually becomes more responsive to their demands. And if you talk to people in Iran, and I am regularly there, they have the hope that things will gradually change, and they know that there is no way but gradual change to improve their situation. Revolution or any form of things that we saw in the so-called Arabellion or Arab Spring is really no option for the Iranians I talked to, and for many Iranians who participated in the elections. So they know that gradually things can improve, and better diplomatic relations to other world powers will lessen the tensions of Iran with other countries, and less tensions automatically lead to less repression at home. This is what we saw in the end 90s, early 2000s. Things got really worse with the Bush era, with the Ahmadinejad era, and this is the hope that people have. And absolutely, yes, there is this hope that this deal will have its trickle-down effect in the country as well. Gradually, slowly, but a solid development towards better times.
Right. Iran denies Israel's right to exist. It's repeatedly vowed to wipe Israel off the map. More than any other nation, Germany feels a responsibility for Israel's security. That's because this country murdered 6 million Jews. And this responsibility for Israel's security has been a cornerstone of German foreign policy with every government since the Second World War.
Germany's historic responsibility is part of my country's reason of state. This means that for me, as German Chancellor, Israel's security will never be negotiable.
German policy is determined by its advocacy for Israel's security and its right to exist. Israel needs to be allowed to live in peace with guaranteed borders.
You have to understand that for us Germans, ensuring that Israel's security needs are not called into question is of ongoing significance.
Ursula Weidenfeld, we don't have much time, unfortunately, for this very complex question, but Germany played a significant role in brokering this deal. The Israeli government feels betrayed, quite clearly. Is it not a betrayal?
I don't think it is a betrayal, because I think that everybody who negotiated this agreement and everybody who was involved in the process before is deeply convinced that the security of Israel is to be granted, and that this is not to be negotiated. And therefore, I think it is one way to look for more peace, for less conflict in the region. It might work out.
But it might not.
It might not. But it is only one way. It is not a fundamental betrayal on Israel.
On this point of Germany's responsibility for Israel's security. Alan Posener, we heard in that little report this term, reason of state. It's a technical term, of course, but very loosely, I suppose we could explain to some of our viewers who don't perhaps understand it, that it means an absolute priority that takes precedence over all moral concerns, in fact. And Chancellor Merkel and every German chancellor for a long time has said that this is so. When the German Vice-Chancellor, was in Teheran this week, he said, for us Germans, Israel's security needs are of ongoing significance. Is that backtracking?
It's obviously backtracking. And it's not only what he says, it's what they're doing. And it's not only Israel. It's, it's the Arab states, the so-called moderate Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Yemen, other states, who've stood by us all this time and who weren't even consulted before this deal was done with the Iranians. No one asked any of them what they felt about it, and they're deeply concerned. So we are backtracking on positions, and we're betraying people who've stood by us through the whole Cold War, who stood by us through the two Iraq wars which we've had since then, who've stood by America and the West, and now weren't even consulted before this deal was struck. And I think that's disgraceful.
Adnan, finally, the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, in a mosque last weekend, preached a sermon in which he said this deal is not going to have any effect on Iran's foreign policy. And the worshippers chanted, "Death to America, death to Israel." Do you think that this is just a minority in Iran who feel this way? Is this going to change?
I mean, this agreement was only possible because they've really focused on Iran's nuclear program and didn't discuss anything else. I think it is also true that Iran's main principles in its foreign policy or in its position towards the United States or its views of Israel will not change. I do believe that cooperation on some security issues with the United States, as has already been happening, will also be happening. The radical positions against the United States and Israel, I strongly believe, is a minority position in Iran. It's a very vocal minority, but it's also a politically not so effective minority. They fill the discursive realm, they have the microphones, they have the papers, they have the mosques to speak, and you have the impression that this is everywhere. But basically the decision makers think in much more pragmatic terms, which is why while I do not really like this kind of chants, am not really scared or worried about them, because this is something that is going on like a ritual. And as unpleasant as it sounds, I don't see it really being something that runs against this nuclear agreement.
Right, we only have time now. Very quickly, unfortunately, I can see we still have lots that we could discuss. But a quick round, I'm going to pose the question that we began this show with. The question, is this ultimately, this deal, all about business? Ursula Weidenfeld.
No, it is not. And I think there can't be any doubt that anybody in Germany and in Europe and in the US puts Israel at risk or at a situation which would lead to more insecurity in Israel.
Adnan.
economic incentives helped, but this was about proving that diplomacy can reach something. And I think this is a major achievement.
And finally, Alan Posener.
Unfortunately, it's not only about business. If it was, it'd be okay. It's about a total romantic idea of achieving peace in the Middle East without being strong, and that's not going to happen.
Thank you very much, all of you, for being my guest. Thank you very much for watching. Join us again next week on Quadriga.